اسلام اشهد ان لا اله الا الله وحده لا شريك له واشهد ان محمدا عبده ورسوله اما بعد فاعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم الله لا إله إلا هو الحي القيوم لا تأخذه سنة ولا نوم له ما في السماوات وما في الأرض من ذا الذي يشفع عنده إلا بإذنه يعلم ما بين أيديهم وما خلفهم ولا يحيطون بشيء من علمه إلا بما شاء وسع كرسيه السماوات والأرض ولا يؤوده حفظهما وهو العلي العظيم لا إكراه في الدين قد تبين الرشد من الغي فمن يكفر بالطاغوت ويؤمن بالله فقد استمسك بالعروة الوثقى لا انفصام لها والله سميع عليم الله ولي الذين آمنوا يخرجهم من الظلمات جاءهم الطاغوت يخرجونهم من النور إلى الظلمات أولئك أصحاب النار هم فيها خالدون. By the grace and sheer mercy of Allah the Almighty, from today we are starting the lesson on Ayat al-Kursi, which is verse number 256 of Surah Al-Baqarah, and the two verses that come after it. We have already covered the first 17 verses of Surah Al-Baqarah in detail, and following the same pattern, inshallah ta'ala, we are going to be covering these three verses. I intend and I hope and pray that Allah ta'ala will give me the ability to explain the subject matter the way I have intended to communicate to all of you, inshallah ta'ala. In the next 4 classes or so, I am expecting that, inshallah, we would hopefully cover these three verses in the next 4 to 5 classes, inshallah. Again, we are going to be looking at the split word translation, word for word translation for these three verses. We will also look at the root analysis of different words that appear in these three verses of the Holy Quran. Then, of course, we are going to look at the tafsir of these three verses as expounded by the Holy Prophet ﷺ himself, his companions, what they have mentioned about these verses of the Quran, then what the promised Messiah ﷺ wrote about Ayat al-Kursi and the following two verses, followed by the tafsir of Hazrat Khalifatul Masih Awwal, Hazrat Muslim Maud radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, Hazrat Khalifatul Masih Salat, Khalifa Rabbani rahimahullah ta'ala, and also our President Imam, Hazrat Khalifatul Masih al-Khamis, ayyadahullah ta'ala bin Nasr al-Aziz. So, without further ado, let me first and foremost share the translation of these three verses that I have just recited. I seek refuge in Allah from Satan, the rejected. Allah the Almighty says, Allah, there is no God but He, the living, the self subsisting, and all sustaining. Slumber seizes him not, nor sleep. To him belongs whatsoever is in the heavens and whatsoever is in the earth. Who is he that will intercede with him except by his permission? He knows what is before them and what is behind them, and they encompass nothing of his knowledge except what he pleases. His knowledge extends over the heavens and the earth, and the care of them burdens him not, and he is the high, the great. And then the following two verses are as follows: There should be no compulsion in religion. Surely right has become distinct from wrong. So whoever refuses to be led by those who transgress and believes in Allah has surely grasped a strong handle which knows no breaking. And Allah is all hearing, all knowing. Allah is the friend of those who believe. He brings them out of every kind of darkness into light, and those who disbelieve, their friends are the transgressors, who bring them out of light into every kind of darkness. These are the inmates of the fire, therein shall they abide. So these are the three verses. I have just read out the English translation of these three verses. And a cursory glance over these three verses will tell you that in these three verses, Allah the Almighty has spoken of many, many themes. And I'll touch upon those themes, inshallah ta'ala, as we move forward. The very first verse in this series is actually Ayat al-Kursi, the verse number 256. Regarding this, there is a hadith. The Holy Prophet ﷺ mentioned, and this is mentioned by Imam Ibn Kathir, rahmahullah. He says the Holy Prophet ﷺ once mentioned that whoever recites the 10 verses from Surah Al Baqarah, namely the first four verses of it, and then Ayat al Kursi and the two verses right after Ayat al Kursi, which I just recited before you, and then the last three verses of Surah Al Baqarah. Whoever recites these 10 verses every day, Satan will not enter upon his house till the morning. In other words, these verses carry a greater sense of not just the meaning, but they have a purpose that they serve in our life. These words of the Holy Quran are so blessed by Allah the Almighty, even in the literal sense that when a person recites these, shaitan runs away from that individual, and not just that individual, but from that individual's household as well. And this is why Khulafai Ahmadiyya time and again have mentioned to recite these 10 verses as often as possible, if possible, every day in our homes. And this is why these verses are also part of the verses that our beloved Huzur Anwar Ayyadahullah Ta'ala bin Nasr Aziz also recites in various prayers that he leads. Similarly, then there is another hadith in which the Holy Prophet ﷺ has mentioned that everything has its peak, and the peak of the Quran is Surah Al Baqarah. And in Surah Al Baqarah, there is one verse which is the leader of all the verses of the Holy Quran. What verse is that? That verse is Ayat al Kursi, the verse that talks about the throne of God, which brings me to different themes which are captured in these verses. As I said, the first hadith that I quoted talks about the 10 verses of Surah Al Baqarah. The first four, Ayat al Kursi, and then the two verses after it, and then the last three verses. So these are 10 verses. If you look at the first four verses of Surah Al Baqarah, it gives us a sketch of a pious person's life, how a pious life should be lived. That's what the first four verses of Surah Al Baqarah tells us. And then when you look at Ayat al Kursi and then the two verses that come after it, they talk about different attributes of Allah the Almighty. The very purpose of one's existence in life is so that we can also adopt the attributes of Allah the Almighty in whatever shape or form that we can in our little sphere. So this is what Ayatul Kursi and then the following two verses talk about, primarily the attributes of Allah the Almighty. And then the last three verses of Surah Al-Baqarah, they contain those prayers which have the power to purify our hearts and soul. So this is the significance why the Holy Prophet ﷺ has mentioned, recite these 10 verses every day in your home. But see, the thing is, when you start reciting these verses, it's not just the recitation of these which are being emphasized upon in this hadith. Rather, it is also the acting upon the injunctions which are mentioned in these 10 verses of Surah Al-Baqarah. Now, when we look at Ayat al Kursi talks about different attributes of God. Ayat al Kursi, you will be amazed, it talks about the throne of Allah. It talks about the concept of shafa'at, to intercede on behalf of someone. And there is a concept of intercession on the day of judgment. And regarding this, many individuals have concocted various kind of stories. For example, about the concept of shifa'at, there is this incident of uh, I believe, of Hazrat Khalifatul Masih Awal radiyallahu ta'ala anhu's sister. His sister had believed in some peer, in some scholar or somebody who used to have his own gaddi. And this individual used to say that you do not have to pray. And the wisdom that he would give is that on the day of judgment, if somebody asks you that you did not used to pray, then on that day you can say that, well, my peer told me that we don't have to pray, so hold him responsible. So when the angels of Allah will come to me and say that, did you give this order? And then he said that, since I am from the progeny of the Holy Prophet ﷺ, I will tell those angels that my ancestors have sacrificed their lives. Is that not enough that you are now going to come here and bother me about it? Run away from here. So this is loosely the concept of shifat that non-Ahmadi Muslims, more or less, have been clinging onto to this day, to this very day. Some believe that any Tom, Dick, and Harry would be able to get intercession on the day of judgment by Holy Prophet ﷺ or by different saints in the Ummah. And because of this, they say that no one, literally no one, has to do anything good in life. Because technically speaking, if you believe in the Holy Prophet ﷺ, then in a way automatically you're going to be interceded for by the Holy Prophet of Islam, Hazrat Muhammad Mustafa Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, on the Judgment Day. Now, this concept is not that different from what the Christian priests have been preaching. The concept of atonement, that as long as you believe that Jesus Christ, died for your sins, then no matter what you do in life, you're forgiven. So the concept of shifat, which is present in the Muslim circles, is no different than the concept of atonement, which is found in modern day Christians. So inshallah ta'ala, we will also touch upon the concept of shifat as explained by the Quran, by Holy Prophet ﷺ, by the companions, and also by promised Messiah ﷺ himself in this day and age. Then it talks about the ever expanding universe as well. It talks about how up until the very recent time, the scientists had no knowledge how vast our universe is. And all of that information is stemming out of Ayat al Kursi. Ayat al Kursi actually talks about the universe at large. It talks about the expanding universe. It talks about light, Allah's noor. It talks about how a time will come when Allah Ta'ala's noor will be considered, how light will be considered as a measure to see how vast the universe is, or the distance between one galaxy to another galaxy. Literally, nowadays, scientists do not measure this distance in kilometers or miles. There does come a time where they stop measuring distances in length, and they start saying, how much time would it take in light years? Allah Ta'ala said, Allahu nuru samawati wal ard. In other places as well, Allah Ta'ala says, Allahu nuru samawati wal ard. That the only way you would be able to figure out the distance of the cosmos is by using light as a measure. And look, so beautifully was it explained more than 1400 years ago in the Holy Quran. And Ayat al-Kursi hints about all these different things. Hazrat Muslim Maud radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, while giving his commentary of Ayat al-Kursi, he has likened the subject matter which is mentioned in this, or he has actually compared the subject matter which is mentioned in Ayat al-Kursi with a king's court. And he has compared the two, how in a worldly sense you have a king, and then in his court you have the viziers, you have people who come to the king, so on and so forth. And then he took that concept, because that's a worldly concept, and then in order to explain to us the concept which is mentioned in Ayat al-Kursi, and how the concept which is mentioned in Ayat al-Kursi supersedes the concept of kings as we understand it, he used this analogy. Inshallah ta'ala, we will cover in detail when we will get to that point. Um, just the Ayat al-Kursi itself has 23 unique roots. We've already covered that, how from each root many different words can be deduced. And this is the beauty, the vastness, the eloquence of the Arabic language, that you can literally take a single root and from it you can make maybe even a couple hundred words. You will not find this kind of eloquence in any other language that exists on the face of the earth. This is the reason why the promised Messiah mentioned that Arabic language is Ummul Al-Sina, it's the mother of all the languages. If all the languages were to be traced back to a single source, all the languages would eventually be traced back to Arabic as their source. And Arabic, we believe, is the revealed language by Allah the Almighty. Then right off the bat, Hazrat Muslim Maud radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, when he started talking about the commentary of Ayat al-Kursi, he says that, look, the worth of something, the value of something is known when that object, whatever that thing is scarce and is limited in quantity. And then he gave a few examples. For example, water is taken for granted. I remember when I went to Africa a few years ago, I went from Canada, and there is no shortage of water in Canada by the grace of Allah the Almighty, nor is there a shortage of water here where we live. But when I went to Africa, I realized how the significance of water, the significance of drinkable, clean water. It literally opened up your eyes. We're living here in the civilized world, and not too far from here is Flint, Michigan, who for the longest time do not have access to clean, drinkable water. And many of their children have been affected, and other individuals have been affected as well. Right here in our own backyard in the United States of America, this is happening. So Hazrat Muslim Maud gave the example that if you really want to understand the worth of something, you get to see it, you get to experience it when that thing is taken away from you, or when you have only a limited amount of it. He says, imagine if you're in jungle and you're in need of water, and you may have all the money that of the world with you, but at that moment that money would do you no good. If there is another individual who only has a single glass of water, it's very likely that that individual might not even give that glass of water to you, because at that moment there you understand the true worth of water. Similarly, oxygen that we breathe in, usually we just breathe in, we don't even think twice about inhaling and exhaling. But now imagine if oxygen or if air itself became scarce, if we were affected somehow, God forbid, in such a way that our air was polluted, that somehow oxygen was polluted, how would we be able to breathe? That's when we really start to think the importance of these things that we actually take for granted in our day-to-day life. Same goes for food as well. There are different items, when they are available in the market in plenty, their value is usually very low, very minimal. But when the same food is not available in higher quantities, it's actually scarce, at that time its price, its value literally jumps. After having mentioned this, Hazrat Muslim Maud radiyallahu ta'ala anhu says, same is the case with God. There is only one God. There are not two gods or three gods or 10,000 gods or 100,000 gods. There is only one God. If there were more than one God, one could say that, okay, if I can't find this God, then I'll just jump over to the other one. If I don't like the second one, I can just quickly jump over to the third one. There are hundreds of thousands of gods for me to choose from. But since there is only one God, where are you going to go? Who are you going to go to? And this is what Allah Ta'ala explains right off the bat in Ayat al-Kursi. Allahu la ilaha illa huwa. Allah la ilaha illa hu. There is no one worthy of worship. There is no other God except Allah, except He. So this was just to give you a taste of what inshallah ta'ala we will be covering. Quickly wanted to share a couple of incidences that I found really, really, really interesting that Hazrat Muslim Maud has quoted from the life of Hazrat Khalifatul Masih Awwal radiyallahu ta'ala anhu. And after mentioning those, inshallah ta'ala, I will wrap up the subject matter for tonight's class. He said that Allah ta'ala is not just present, but He's also Al-Hayy. He is also the living God. And this living God was present and alive 100 years ago during the time of the promised Messiah Islam. The same God was alive at the time of Holy Prophet 1400 years ago. And the same God was also present at the time of Musa alayhi salam, Isa alayhi salam, Nuh alayhi salam, and Adam alayhi salam. And He used to show His signs. Because He's the living God, His signs are also living. His signs also do not die. So Hazrat Muslim Maud mentioned that this living God shows His living signs in all the ages. And then he gave a couple of incidents that are extremely moving. He gave a couple of these incidences from the life of Hazrat Khalifatul Masih Awwal. He said that people would come. He first said, Zinda Khuda apne bandon ki ta'id mein hamesha apne nishanat dikhata rehta hai. One who is living God keeps on showing signs in support of His servants. He keeps on showing signs. And then he gave the example of Hazrat Khalifatul Masih Awwal radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, how people would come and leave their belongings to Hazrat Khalifatul Masih Awwal as amanat, as trust. They would say, we're going away for some time, or we would just want to, put these with you. And they would be in the form of cash, so on and so forth. And Hazrat Khalifatul Masih Awwal would agree that he would take care of their belongings. And at time when there was need, Hazrat Khalifatul Masih Awwal would use from that amount which was given as amanat to him. But when the individual would come to him and say that, can I please get my amanat that I had entrusted you with, if I could get that back? Hazrat Khalifatul Masih Awwal radiyallahu ta'ala anhu had a very mystic nature, Sufi mizaj. He would not discard any paper. He would usually keep and save all the papers that he had. So he would take a piece of paper and he would write a note to his family, ke amanat mein se 200 rupees bhijwa dein, or from the belongings that people have entrusted with us, sent 200 rupees or so on and so forth, whatever the amount this person was asking. And sometimes the response would come that there is nothing. Whatever people had entrusted us with in terms of cash for different purposes and different needs, it has been used. Now, a worldly person would become extremely nervous. Look how Hazrat Khalifatul Masih Awwal would respond. He would just say to the person, unfortunately, I don't have the money at this point, at this moment, but hold on. And literally within few minutes, Hazrat Khalifatul Masih Awwal say, Khalifatul Masih Sani wrote, somebody from Bombay, from Mumbai, or from Junagadh would come and say, Huzur, I have brought some nazarana for you, or here's some token money for you. And it would happen to be the exact amount that the person sitting in front of him was in need of. He mentioned, Hazrat Muslim Maud then mentioned that once it happened that somebody had entrusted Hazrat Khalifa Awal with some amount. And he came while Hazrat Khalifa Masih Awal was sitting in the company of other companions of the Promised Messiah. And now the individual is right in front of him and is saying, sir, if I could get back what I had given you. And there was another companion of Hazrat Khalifa Masih Awal, his student actually, Hazrat Hafiz Roshan Ali Sahib radiyallahu ta'ala anhu. He knew the amount that that person had entrusted Hazrat Khalifa Awal with. Hazrat Khalifa Awal found out from his home that there was no money at home. So Hazrat Khalifatul Masih Awal radiyallahu ta'ala anhu did not panic. He had his firm faith in Allah Ta'ala, trust in Allah Ta'ala. He said, wait. And soon a patient walks in. And Hazrat Khalifatul Masih Awal treats him. And then in a piece of paper, he wraps an amount and presents it to Hazrat Khalifatul Masih Awal. And Hazrat Hafiz Roshan Ali Sahab was nearby. So Hazrat Hafiz Roshan Ali Sahab accepted that amount. And he opened it up. And Hazrat Khalifa Awal looked towards Hazrat Hafiz Roshan Ali Sahab and he said, okay, how much is the money in it? And he knew how much Hazrat Khalifa Masih Awal had to give this person back. So Hazrat Hafiz Roshan Ali Sahab said, Hazur utne hi hain jitne ki Hazur ko zarurat hai. Exact amount on the dot. Hazrat Khalifa Awal mentioned, give it to him. Last waqia is that Hazrat Khalifa Awal used to narrate. He used to narrate this incident about some Sufi saint, ages ago. This Sufi saint owed someone some money. He had loaned some money from a person, and that person, who had lent the loan, now was sitting in front of the Sufi saint. And he said, sir, it's been so long, you owe me this money and you haven't paid me back. I want you to pay my money back to me. So the Sufi saint said, I don't have the money. The man started abusing him, got angry. And while this was happening, a confectioner, halwai, walked by. And the Sufi saint called him. It was a young person, young boy or young man. And the Sufi saint said to him, can I get some halwa, some sweet worth of 50 cents? 8 ane. 8 ane ka halwa de do. Give me some sweets for 50 cents. If I was to give you in the dollar amount, would be $50. So this young man gave him the halwa, and then that Sufi saint presented that halwa to this person who was sitting and abusing him. And the person very happily, ate the halwa. And now the confectioner is saying, can I get my money, sir? And now the Sufi saint is saying, I don't have the money to pay you as well. And now the first person is thinking, what is wrong with this man? He owed me money, and now he owes this guy money as well. He didn't pay me, and he hasn't paid him as well. And while this was happening, the Sufi saint was not shocked. He was not nervous. He was calm. And all of a sudden, somebody came to him and said that the Rais of such and such area, meaning a high esteemed person, a well-to-do person from such and such area, has sent some nazrana for you. See, so he gave him an amount in an envelope. The Sufi saint opened up the envelope, and there was the amount which he owed to the person sitting in front of him, but it was shy by 50 cents that he actually owed to the confectioner, the halwai. So the Sufi saint closed the envelope, gave him back, and he said, this isn't for me. The man who had brought the envelope became extremely worried, and he quickly started to go through his pockets, and he realized that there was another envelope. And he said, yes, sir, you are right. This is your envelope. So the Sufi saint opened the envelope only to find that it contained the exact amount that he owed to the person sitting in front of him. And then on top of that, there were 50 cents, which he owed to the halwai. So when you believe in Allah Ta'ala, when you trust in Allah Ta'ala, then Allah Ta'ala shows signs. But nobody should take from the incidents that I've mentioned that you do not have to pay back your qarze. When you take a loan from someone, please pay back. If you don't pay back your loans, Allah Ta'ala will hold you responsible for that on the day of judgment. And you don't want to be in that position on the day of judgment where Allah the Almighty, in front of everyone, puts you on the spot and then you get punished because you thought it's okay to not to withhold the right of someone, that you thought that it's okay to borrow the money but not to return it. Unfortunately, there are people who have the habit of borrowing money from people, but when it comes to giving it back to them, returning the amount back to them, they make different kind of excuses. I hope and sincerely pray that we will learn from this subject matter, which is being shared here in these classes, and we will, inshallah ta'ala, reform ourselves. Wa akhiru dawana and alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Jazakallah.